think we can begin.
Thanks, Gary. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's CID Commercial Investment Division meeting on controlling energy costs. My name is John Barrett. I am president of the Commercial Investment Division. I'm also a broker at RM Friedland in Harrison, New York. I'd like to introduce Mackenzie Forsberg today. Mackenzie is the new vice chair of the CID. Mackenzie is co-founder and COO of Genesis Realty Group based in the Bronx, New York. She holds a BA from Binghamton University and is a licensed real estate broker, LIHTC certified, and a certified HPD property manager and 7A administrator who has worked as an owner-operator position over the last 15 years and is highly proficient in rent regulation laws and compliance. Mackenzie leads Genesis Realty Group's green management initiatives to protect the environment in which we work and increases clients' cash flow through projects such as steam to gas, hydronic boiler conversions, solar panel installations, and lighting retrofits. She manages NYSERDA and Wilden incentive programs, energy-related local law compliance, and energy monitoring of building systems. She spearheads business development and new property management acquisitions, aids in underwriting and financing for new acquisitions and refis, and oversees property and regulatory operations. Additionally, Mackenzie sits on the City of Yonkers Planning Board and is heavily involved in several women in business organizations in New York City and Westchester County, BMAR, CHIP, and other business-related organizations. So Mackenzie, welcome.
It's a pleasure and an honor to join you, John, and HGAR as the new co-chair of the Commercial and Investment Division. I could go into all the detail that you just went into about all of the energy efficiency projects that we've invested in as a company over the past 10 years. And I really appreciate you looking into that history, because this topic specifically, for my first topic being a part of the CID, is very near and dear to my heart. So it's a pleasure to be welcomed, and thanks for having me.
Well, welcome aboard. And your background in energy is very timely for today, as is the program itself. For anybody who opened up their energy bill last month, you got a sticker shock. And no matter who your provider was, you got sticker shock. So this is a great program today. We've got two guests who will be presenting. They'll present for about 20 to 25 minutes each, and then we'll have time for questions at the end. If you have any questions, at the bottom of your screen is a little Q&A icon. Hit that, type your questions in, and we will try to get to all of your questions at the end. So I'll introduce the panelists right now. We've got Boz Riley, who is a senior energy advisor at Marathon Energy. He's got over 20 years of industry experience. He joined Marathon after working as an account executive at Sprague Energy. He's a lifelong New York City resident and graduated from Fordham University. In his spare time, he enjoys golf, softball, and coaching his children's Little League teams. Welcome, Boz.
Thank you, John.
We also have Ron Kamen, who is the founder, CEO, and clean energy thought leader of Earthkind Energy. Ron has decades of experience and leadership in catalyzing exponential changes in sustainable energy adoption with governments, not-for-profits, and businesses. He has developed successful public-private partnerships in clean power and sustainability programs, projects, marketing, outreach, as well as policy. Earthkind provides customized expert clean energy consulting services that galvanize swift and cost-saving transactions to carbon neutrality for organizations of all types and sizes. Earthkind identifies, evaluates, and launches and manages clean energy programs that are tailored to each organization's unique vision, energy use priorities, prior action, sustainability goals, and financial resources. Earthkind brings over 30 years experience in delivering clean energy projects that maximize ROI and minimize greenhouse emissions for corporate, not-for-profit, and government clients. So just one opening comment before I hand the floor over to Boz, and that is, today we've got two kinds of energy. Let's call the old energy legacy energy. Let's call the new energy clean energy. new energy forms. Both are good. Both work. There are good points about each kind, and there are bad points about each kind. So let's learn a little bit today. And with that, Boz, take over.
Okay, let's share my screen.
There you go.
That's better. All right.
Yes.
Oh, I don't know why it's going black. Okay, hold on. All right. Should be good to go. Are we good to go?
Yes.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar on how to control energy costs in a volatile market. As John said, my name is Boz Riley, and I am a senior energy advisor for Marathon Energy. Marathon is a privately held full-service energy supply company. We provide heating oil, natural gas, electricity, diesel fuel, gasoline, propane, mechanical services, and some sustainable solutions. Our main office is in Queens, but our footprint covers New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Maryland, and we also have offices in Syracuse, Buffalo, and the Hudson Valley. Today, I'm going to talk about the current status of the energy markets, what's causing the volatility, and some things that you could do to help control your energy costs. First question is, what affects energy prices? I've been in this industry for over 20 years, and the last 2 years have been the most volatile I have ever experienced. When I first started in this industry, energy markets were much less volatile. Heating oil prices were consistently under $1 a gallon, and in general, prices only fluctuated based on weather. When it got cold, prices went up. For the most part, it was basic supply and demand. Around that same time, when I started in the industry, natural gas and electricity deregulation had just been introduced to the market, and third-party companies, ESCOs, were just starting to solicit consumers. Now the energy markets are vastly different. We are now part of a global energy market. So whenever there are supply or production issues anywhere in the world, energy prices shoot up for the entire world. Prices now fluctuate throughout the day, every single day, just like the stock market, based on not only supply and demand and weather, but also because of geopolitical events. In the last 2 years alone, we have gone through a global pandemic, a change in our president and US energy policies, and currently there is a war going on between the Ukraine and Russia. These global events have had wide-ranging effects across all aspects of our personal and professional lives. For our purposes today, we're going to focus on their effects on the energy market. Why the recent volatility is the first question. In March of 2020, the price of crude oil fell to nearly $0 per barrel because of the COVID-19 global shutdown. $0 per barrel. Fast forward to earlier this month, the price of heating oil reached nearly $5 per gallon. So we went from oil having almost zero value to being at its highest level in decades in just a 2-year span. The main reason for the extreme volatility in the energy markets right now is the war in the Ukraine and the sanctions being imposed on Russia. Russia was contributing about 10 million barrels of oil per day to the global oil supply. Now, US sanctions have banned the imports of Russian oil and Russian natural gas. Frustrating aspects of our current price situation is that the US only imports about 5% of our oil from Russia, and the US produces 11 million barrels of crude oil per day. The US actually generates more crude oil than we consume, and we sell more of it overseas than we buy from foreign countries. Yet, we still rely heavily on imported oil. This is because the US wells are located far from the Northeast and the West Coast, where most of the fuel is consumed. and we do not have the pipelines to transport it to the coast. The challenge in moving oil thousands of miles across the country means that it's sometimes cheaper and easier to buy it from other countries. What about natural gas and electricity? Natural gas and electricity prices have also experienced some volatility, but not as significant as the oil prices. The reason for that is because of the shale rock fracking that is done in the United States. The United States has been able to produce enough natural gas to not only make us self-sufficient, but also able to export it to other countries that need it. Right now, US natural gas exports to Europe have increased because of the Russian sanctions. The other major factor for the recent increase in electric prices is due to New York City and New York State's push for green energy. The end goal of the Clean Energy Standard is for 70% of all electricity to be produced by renewable energy sources. The higher cost of renewable energy sources will continue to cause an increase in the electricity it's used to produce. Here are a couple slides, here are a couple charts that show how the fluctuation I just talked about. If you see at the beginning, this is the oil chart. If you see at the beginning of the chart, it's March 2021. We were still coming out of our second wave of COVID. We had that spike in the winter of 2021, and the prices remained relatively stable. If you see how the line does not jump up much. Going into the end of the summer and the early fall, that's when the world decided to, well, especially New York and the country decided to open up a lot more. People started going back to their offices, kids were going back to school, and right around that same time is when the Hurricane Ida hit the Northeast. Now, the big issue with a hurricane is the majority of our natural gas and oil comes from the Gulf of Mexico. That's where a lot of our drilling is done. That's where a lot of our refineries are. So when a hurricane comes through there, those facilities have to be shut down for safety, protection, employees and workers there, whatever the case may be. So that's why you see a little bit of a spike as it starts to go into mid to late September. This is the time of the year that we're usually putting a lot of natural gas and oil into storage. But when the hurricane hits and we have to shut down those facilities for a few days, that storage halts. So as we move forward into the early fall, you see the spike because our storage numbers are not where they had been in previous years. As we go into the fall, there's another little, a consistent, more of a steady little spike. And as we get towards the beginning of December, we see the price dip a little bit. That's because if everyone remembers, this past December was actually pretty mild. So the weather is still a big driving factor in the price of our energy. As we moved into January and we got hit with the severe winter weather, that's where you saw the prices start to go up. People are using more. Again, the world has opened up a little more. Kids are in school. People are traveling more. People are going back to work. This is around the holiday season, even with the colder weather where more people are traveling, and that's why you're seeing a spike. Then as we got into mid to late February, that's when the war in Ukraine hit, and that's where we saw a huge jump in prices. Here is a similar graph showing natural gas. Now the natural gas, as far as pricing wise, oil is still much more expensive, especially at this point, than natural gas. They don't compare apples to apples. There is a conversion factor, but even with that conversion factor, natural gas is still cheaper than oil, especially right now with the recent spike. But you will see, even though they do not compare apples to apples, the market trends still tend to fluctuate together. again, going to, if you look, it stays flat, a couple little up and down, and then around the same time that the oil trended upwards, the natural gas trended upwards. All because
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
You know, it was showing, you know, toward the end of February on the oil price where it really peaked. And it's kind of showing in this graph here, started moving up in August, it looks like, significantly, end of August into September. You know, both of those occurred well before Russia invaded the Ukraine.
Correct. What I mentioned on the heating oil chart was that's when the hurricane hit around that time of the end of August, early September. And
Right.
the hurricane, when the hurricanes come around that time, it affects how much gas we're able to put in storage, because we have to shut down the refineries and the drilling that happens in the Gulf of Mexico, because that's usually where the hurricanes come through as they head up the East Coast. So that's why around that time you see that spike. And similarly, you see it the same with electricity. Now, electricity flows pretty much hand in hand with natural gas because natural gas is used to generate electricity. Now, in the end, we can talk about the market, we can complain about the market, but unfortunately, we cannot control the market. So let's talk about some things we can control. The first thing that is in your control with your buildings, with your properties, is your usage and consumption. By making your equipment run that much more efficient, you are controlling how much fuel and energy you're going to use. One of the things that we highly recommend is to have a good heat control system. A lot of people, almost every building nowadays, every system has some kind of heat timer. If you do not have a heat timer or some kind of heat control system, I remember when I first started, oil prices were not as high, but buildings would turn their heat on, it would kick on in the morning in the winter, and it would run pretty much 24/7. It would never really shut down. It would just run, especially on a cold day. And those buildings were wasting a lot of fuel, because in the middle of the day, when people are at work or when the weather gets a little warmer on a sunny day, there are opportunities during the day to cycle your boiler down so that you are using less energy throughout the day. The newer heat control systems also come with apartment temperature sensors. Now, these are installed in different apartments and areas throughout the building. So some buildings, if you ever notice, in the middle of the winter, you go by a building and some buildings, apartments have their windows open and other apartment buildings have their windows closed. That's because of the inefficiency of the system. It's just providing too much heat to areas that don't need it and not enough heat to areas that do need it. This is what these temperature sensors can help eliminate. And it all is tied in. And even some of the better, newer heat control systems, you could control right from your phone or your computer. And you could, set up the cycles that work best for your building and your tenants. The other thing
Buzz, I also wanted to add as an owner operator, these energy efficiency measures are costly, but the return on investment with the Con Edison incentives or National Grid incentives combined with the savings, it pays for itself. And if there's any commercial investor or broker who's in that market on this webinar right now, and you don't have these control measures in your portfolio, you are remiss and you're just throwing money out the window.
Absolutely. I especially right now with where these oil prices are. If your building is running on oil and you're paying around $4 a gallon for oil, even if you could cut your usage back by 5%, 10%, it is a significant savings. And like Mackenzie said, there is a good return on your investment for these. And then as I'll link that in as we go on, but also New York City is being a lot more strict on the efficiency of each building. So these will also help with that, as I'll get to on my next slide. The other thing we always recommend is to clean and tune your boiler and burner at least once a year. Most companies, I always recommend doing it kind of heading into the heating season, summertime, going into the early fall. I equate it kind of to like working like a car, right? These are mechanical, they're mechanical systems. If you do not maintain them, if you do not clean them, if you do not change worn parts, then it causes the burner, causes the boiler to work that much harder. And the harder it's working, the more fuel you are using, the more energy you are using. Two types of systems, there's steam systems, there are hot water systems. You need to check different things depending on the type of system that your building runs. Again, every little aspect working efficiently will definitely save you, limit and minimize the energy usage. Another simple thing is the piping that runs through the boiler, the boiler room, through the building. If it's not under the ground, these pipes should be well insulated. Similar to your house, if you have good insulated windows, if you have a good insulated attic, it helps you, it prevents you from overuse of energy. These are all things that, again, nothing's cheap nowadays, right? But these are things to be proactive with. These are things that you can control. You have a good service company, you have a good boiler company, they should be able to do these things for you every year. Last but not least, if you are burning oil, it is important to chemically treat your oil tank. What happens is the oil, just the way oil is, because of the product it tends to have residue. It tends to build up on the walls and the bottom of the tank. This extra layer of residue causes the system to work harder. It prevents the heat from traveling through the pipelines at a more efficient rate. So all of these things are more on the mechanical service side, which you can do to help, to help minimize and lessen your energy usage. Like I touched on before, being in compliance with New York City local laws is extremely important. Right now, New York City is big on the push to get everyone green, to lessen their emissions, to make every energy more efficient. Obviously, they are very concerned, New York City being one of the most congested, biggest cities in the entire world, our effect on the environment, because of the energy used, because of the fossil fuel energy we use, is, that is the concern of New York City. So doing things like your annual boiler, your triennial emissions, different local laws, 152, 88, local law 84 and 133, local law 87, all of these, besides helping make your buildings and equipment more efficient and just being more on top of how much energy you are using, it also will save you money in the long run, because again, New York City loves going out and writing violations and, oh, you're not up to code. So if you're ahead of this, not only are you saving money on your energy conservation, but you're also eliminating and avoiding fines from New York City, which are always tough to fight, and you always end up having to pay at least the majority of it. Again, like I said to Mackenzie, even if you improve your efficiency by 5 to 10% at current levels, there is a significant savings. So after improving, after doing this kind of mechanical work and physical work of making sure your equipment is efficient, there are other ways to manage your cost. One of the first things you should be taking advantage of is the bioheat tax credits. This is for,
just 1 second, I have to let you know. We're at 10:25 right now, so you got like 2 or 3 minutes to wrap up. I don't know if you need to speed up or not.
All right, I will. So the biofuel tax credit, right now, the minimum standard for biofuel is 5% B5. The New York City, New York State has offered a tax credit for anyone who chooses to use more than 5%. If you use 6%, then you will get 6 cents per gallon of oil that you use for a calendar year. If you use 10%, then you will get 10% per gallon. You file it with your taxes at the end of the year and you get a tax credit. Not every building is eligible depending on the tax status. Other things you could do is, depending on the company that you're dealing with for your energy, natural gas, electric, heating oil, there are different ways to fix your pricing, locking in your pricing. Now, granted, there's not always a guaranteed savings when you lock in your price. Timing is everything. It all depends on the time of year you lock in. But better, depending on the oil company you're using, they are willing to work with you. Like my company, we're willing to work with you. You could lock in portions. You could lock in for shorter periods of time. On the gas side, you could do NYMEX plus deals where you're only locking in certain aspects of your total usage. In the end, what you're trying to do is hedge yourself a little bit. You're trying to give yourself some price certainty. You're trying to give yourself some budget certainty. Really, what everyone is trying to avoid is what happened this past winter with the crazy spikes in oil, stuff that is totally out of our control, and we're caught off guard. The last thing I want to touch on real quick are demand response programs. What this program is, if you are willing and have the ability to reduce your electricity usage during peak demand times, then Con Edison will pay you to do so. Here's the example. Everyone comes home from work in the summer, hottest day of the year. The first thing everyone does is turn their air conditioning on high, jack it all the way up. This puts a high amount of stress on the electric grid. With that stress, what happens, we could have brownouts, we could have blackouts. So what Con Edison offers to larger buildings, this is better for large commercial office buildings, because residential buildings, people don't want to lessen their electricity, especially at peak times, because everyone wants their air conditioned. Everyone's going to be using a lot of electricity. But as people leave office buildings, there are opportunities to dim lights, shut off one of the elevators, lessen your electricity, curtailing your electricity. And by curtailing your electricity during those peak times, depending on how much you're able to curtail, Con Edison is willing to pay you. In closing, as we all know, there are so many things that are out of our control that affect us on a daily basis. But with the right guidance and some creative thinking, there are always ways to manage things we control. Thanks again for everyone attending today. If you would like to further discuss any topics I brought up today, please contact me directly. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Boz. If you could stop sharing your screen now, okay? Or somebody did it for us.
Yep, I think someone did it for me. Thank
you. And let's try to share Ron Kamen's screen now. Ron, we'll pass it over to you.
Thanks so much, John. It's a pleasure to be here. Really appreciate the opportunity to discuss how to control energy costs in this volatile market. And I'd like to start out with this quote. Who said that the Stone Age didn't end because we ran out of stones? There's a few people that's attributed to, but the one who most folks think said it first was actually a former Saudi Arabia minister of oil. And, we can agree on a bunch of things, and I agree with Boz totally. And efficiency is the first thing. Reduce your energy consumption in every way, shape, and fashion you can. But the ultimate thing is we've got to get our energy from somewhere. And the question is, where are we getting it from? And that's also a way to look at how we can save money over time. Myself, just to be clear, I'm not against oil and propane. When I bought my house about 20 years ago, it had oil in it. I ripped it out. It was expensive. It was dirty, required a lot of maintenance, and it was very volatile in terms of cost. And I put in propane. When my central air conditioning system went a few years later, I stripped that out and put in a heat pump I now have solar electricity supplying the electricity for my heat pump, and I have electric cars. And by doing that, I've saved myself a lot of money. I've reduced my volatility of energy costs. And in addition, I still have my propane as a backup heat source. And I also use it for a generator right now, but that's going to transition over the next couple of years too, as battery prices keep coming down and some innovative technologies keep coming into the market. So yesterday, John, you and I were on watched a BCW State of Westchester's Economy, one of a 4-part series, this one specifically on development. These were some of the leading developers in the county. And the one thing that they all had in common when they were talking about the things that they're doing that are innovative and on the cutting edge, and what they're all doing now with their new buildings is installing technology, communication technology, wireless technology, etc., and clean energy technologies. And they all are installing solar, heat pumps, and electric vehicle charging stations. So we're not alone in terms of thinking that this is happening and recognizing this benefit. So, and with Earthkind Energy, we've been doing this for over 30 years, working with a lot of different developers, a lot of folks in the university, college, nonprofit sector. We've worked with all types of governments and authorities and municipalities, and then a host of businesses, large, small, medium. And in every instance, these were folks who wanted to figure out how they can save money with clean energy technologies and reduce their carbon footprints and move towards a more sustainable company, more sustainable entity. So one question for everyone. Today, what's the least expensive source of electric power in New York State? It's not oil. It's not gas. It's not nuclear. It's not wind. And you'd be right, it's hydropower. And for those of you in the real estate world who've worked with some larger entities, you know that the New York Power Authority's Recharge New York program offers the least expensive source of electricity in the state. It's a tool, an economic development tool that we've been using for years to help keep businesses in the state or attract them to the state. And the reason is because when you build a renewable energy resource, you just maintain the infrastructure, and when the water flows, you get cheap electricity. When the wind blows, you get cheap electricity. And the interesting part for all of us now is when the sun shines, you get cheap electricity. And actually that cheap hydropower is now being directly confronted with a lower cost source of electricity from the sun. And we're going to show you a couple of examples of folks that we're working with. In Westchester, when you take a look at commercial energy prices, usually a commercial account would have a kilowatt hour rate of about 14 cents a kilowatt hour. If you looked at solar today and you put in a solar electricity system, I have 3 bids from 3 solar providers for a particular developer we just issued last week. When we took a look at the numbers, when you amortize out the cost of electricity that they were pre-purchasing with their solar, it was at 10 cents a kilowatt hour without any incentives. When you factored in the state's incentives that are there now and the tax credits and the accelerated depreciation, bonus depreciation, all the benefits that come from doing this, what you wind up with is a kilowatt hour rate that's less than a penny a kilowatt hour. And yes, you have to prepay for it, but when you look at financing that investment and stretching it out over whatever time period, clearly you can save a tremendous amount of money from day one going to solar today. We take a look at another energy source, which are fuels for our cars with gasoline versus electric car. You find that an average gas car going 12,000 miles a year at 25 miles a gallon efficiency would use about 480 gallons of gas at $4, 480 gallons of gas at $4 a gallon. It's a little less than $2,000 a year. You take a similar electric car that goes that 12,000 miles, and they get between 3 and 4 miles per kilowatt hour for the charge. Let's assume 3 miles per kilowatt hour for 4,000 kilowatt hours. And even if you were in the most expensive electricity area in the country with Con Edison, you would still have a dramatic reduction in your fuel cost, nearly 50%. And if you had solar, you're looking at an even more substantial reduction, down to less than $400 a year, without the incentives for solar driving those economics. Third, we take a look at heat and air conditioning and hot water, and we modeled a few developers' buildings. This one is an average one for about 100,000 square foot building. All buildings are different in terms of efficiencies, how they're used, et cetera. But if you looked at oil or propane at a 91% efficiency, at about $3.13 a gallon with a reasonably efficient air conditioning system, you're looking at about $9,000 a month worth of energy costs for that heating, air conditioning, and hot water, or $110,000 a year. If you swap that out with an air source heat pump, what you're looking at that 14 cents per kilowatt hour is a dramatic reduction per month and a dramatic reduction per year, 50%. And if you go to a geothermal heating and cooling system, which taps into the heat beneath our feet, the energy from the earth that the earth has been absorbing for billions of years, which is why when we dig down below the frost line, it's 50 degrees and it stays that way. So capturing that 50 degrees and bringing it up and using it for our heating and cooling in our buildings, you wind up with an amazingly cost-effective and dramatic reduction in energy costs. You can pay for solar in a bunch of different ways. If you have capital, you can build it, own it, operate it. That's usually the best way. If you have to finance it or can finance it, you finance it in various different ways. There's a number of different innovative financing programs out there. Or if you decide you don't have a capital or you can't take the tax benefits, a power purchase agreement or operating lease might be a better option for you to save money from day one without laying out a dime. Or the third way to get revenue out of solar these days, and you're seeing this from a lot of those developers I mentioned before, is they're installing solar on their roofs or in their parking lots or on their grounds, and they're getting a lease from the solar company, getting another cash revenue source. And one of the things that we all know with our buildings is that as we reduce our operating expenses, we increase the value of our buildings. And that's what our ultimate goal is to reduce cost and increase value. One example is one of my clients was Macy's, and one of the things that Macy's does, I found out from working with them on one project, is anytime they're doing a new roof, they fund that roof replacement with a solar project, because either using third-party financing or using all the tax benefits that they get out of solar, they're able to build the roof replacement into a very lucrative cash position. And basically they don't do any new roofs now across the country unless they build solar into it. And sometimes if they have a relatively newer roof, they'll just build a replacement roof into the deal over that 25 years of life expectancy on the solar system. All right, so geothermal. So geothermal drills holes into the ground. And in New York State, if you drill a hole, you can go down 500 feet without any additional permits beyond the standard ones. You go 500 feet under the footprint of any building. And that energy, where you send the fluid down, bring it back, it now has 50 degrees temperature that you're starting to heat or cool your space with. That energy can heat or cool up to 30-story buildings, even as far north as these two buildings in Ontario, near Toronto. 500 feet under the ground, under the footprint of any building with geothermal systems, can carry the heating, cooling, and hot water for up to 30 stories. Give you an example of solar combined with geothermal. When you take the energy from the ground and the energy from the sun, this project in New Paltz has 42 apartments. They have no electricity cost, no heating cost, no hot water costs. Their tenants pay a fixed price for all their energy included, and that's because they combine solar with geothermal. And we're seeing this in even larger and bigger projects, such as this one in the Rockaways, with a Westchester developer who's doing the same thing on the west side of Westchester, the southwest side of Westchester now, where he's combining solar with geothermal. That solar and geothermal means that they have a lower cost of electricity, a lower cost of heating and cooling, dramatically less than any other piece out there, especially, and this was before the rising escalation in energy prices. The best example, if you don't think that you can do geothermal, that I love though, is this little place in Manhattan, St. Patrick's Cathedral, where they found that the least capital cost to replace their aging heating system and install a cooling system was actually geothermal and going 2,000 feet into the bedrock under St. Patrick's Cathedral. It reduced the amount of space they needed for their energy systems. It was the least cost capital and reduced their energy consumption by 30%. And obviously with these types of prices now, it's an even better thing. By the way, that's the Pope in front there, for those of you who are Catholic, blessing the project. All right, so these financial savings can be achieved in a few different ways. If you have capital, you have access to capital financing, you can take advantage of the tax credits. You're looking at a 10 to 30% or better investment. And actually on one solar project where a couple of weeks ago, we put it out to bid, the bids came back, and with the Con Ed territory, one of the things that's happening is usually in Con Ed territory, you're looking at about a 5-year or less payback return on your investment. But with the new incentives that are about to be decided on by the state, those incentives happen in Con Ed territory, their return on investment is going to be less than 2 years. And again, you can do this with no cash down, with immediate and long-term savings through various different financing mechanisms.
Ron, I just want to add one thing to that also to kind of directly address some attendees in the audience, whether you're a broker or an owner operator of commercial property. When you conduct these measures with such a short-term ROI, these properties become more attractive for financing for your mortgage, and you can tweak the numbers on the underwriting for the expenses. So say, the underwriting numbers are a certain percentage for utility costs, you're using less than probably a lot of the other clients that they have that they're financing. So you can work with your mortgage brokers to project that narrative and use lower projections on your expenses.
Great point, Mackenzie. And one of the things that we've found working with a bunch of developers is depending upon how you look at your cap rate, we've seen ranges from 6% to 8 or 9% or even higher, depending upon the financing structure. So every dollar in reduced operating cost winds up increasing the value by 6 to 10 times in terms of that sales price and that value of that building. And you're right in terms of its ability to finance and get additional income out of that property, cash out of the property. So whether you do these things because you're looking to reduce costs, one thing that everybody should know is that this is happening. And we could all debate upon, whether it's the right thing, not the right thing for New York to be leading this whole wave that is happening across the planet. But when we take a look at greenhouse gases, the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, New York state law, says that we need to reduce our greenhouse gases by 40% by 2030 and 85% by 2050. And the way that we're going to get there is by going from 25% renewable electricity today to 70% and then 100% by 2040, and then rolling out a bunch of these technologies in the heating and cooling sector and in the transportation sector. Today, there are massive incentives to do this. If you're looking at solar, again, in Con Ed territory, the incentives are going to go from 20 cents a kilowatt hour. If this proposal gets passed, which is very likely at this point, it will be $1.30 a watt, which is unbelievable. It pays for more than half the project. You take the tax benefits, and now all of a sudden you have a tremendously profitable project. That's for solar, especially in Con Ed territory, but it works everywhere. Heating and cooling, these incentives are there for air and ground source heat pumps, geothermal heat pumps, over $500 million of incentives. And then with transportation, similarly, there's incentives there to both reduce the cost of an electric vehicle with New York State cash grant of $2,000 for many electric vehicles, and there's over 60 of them that qualify, whether you like BMW, Porsche, Mercedes, or Audis on the higher end, or Fords or GM or Nissan on the lower end. There's massive incentives there. And then there's a $7,500 tax credit, federal tax credit as well on most of these vehicles on the national level. Then there's the tax credits and the low interest financing and energy as a service. So you can do this with no cash down. But if you don't do it soon, not only are you going to be subject to the volatility and to the tremendous increase in prices that we're experiencing now, not only will it continue to support these despots and crazy jihads all over the world, but in New York City right now, as Baz mentioned, there is local law 97, which says that you need to reduce your greenhouse gases per square foot. If you have a building over 25,000 square feet or more, you have to hit certain goals by 2024, or you start paying penalties. Well, right now, the New York statewide Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act has incentives. There is discussions going on about how to move towards incorporating these goals into the energy code, so you won't be able to build anything without hitting these goals. And if you don't hit those goals with existing buildings, similar penalties to New York City, where those penalties are winding up being 50 cents a square foot starting in 2024 on the average, and that will continue to go up. If you don't think that it's really coming into place, this was just one example of one law that just got set, where New York State is banning all sales of all gas vehicles by 2035. This is happening. It's happening fast. And how fast? Well, last century, we talked about how the Stone Age didn't end because of a lack of stones, and the horse and buggy age didn't end because of a lack of horses and buggies. So this picture was taken in 1900, where it was all horse and buggies, one car. How long did it take until it was all cars and one horse and buggy? 13 years. And our pace of change in this modern age is much faster. I'm Ron Kamen, Earthkind Energy Consulting. We work with all types of entities. I'm happy to do a free consultation with you, talk about your situation, whether we can help you in some way, shape, or fashion, figure out how to reduce your energy costs, lock in, deal with price volatility. All the things Baz mentioned is all great stuff to do from a short-term perspective. In the medium and long-term perspective, though, we should all get ready to make this transition. It needs to happen. It is happening, and you can save money doing it. Thanks, John.
One quick question. Isn't all this electrification going to blow up the electric grid? Can the electric grid handle that?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So there is no doubt that the electric grid was built one way, right? To basically be a one-way source of power to take energy from central generation through transmission and then distribute it to all of us. And now what's happening is that we have a much more movement towards decentralization. So just like when we started out with our supercomputers that were a massive building work, energy is becoming much more compact. Energy generation is becoming much more local. And just as we can now communicate over the web with all this interconnected network that we have, a similar thing is happening with energy. I'm so glad you asked that question, because one thing I'd like to share is this, this little slide from Ford, which for those of you who saw the Super Bowl, there were 7 electric vehicle ads on the Super Bowl this year. It was pretty amazing. And you saw all different types of vehicles. Ford in particular now has this Ford 150 electric truck, right? And this truck not only is electric and can go and travel without gasoline, but it becomes a generator for your house when the grid goes down. And it also can act as an independent power source if you're out in the woods or need power. These innovations and technologies are what's going to drive the future. And Americans have always been on the edge of figuring out how to use our technologies to achieve our goals. And that's one thing that is going to happen now, is that as we see our electric transportation system becoming battery-driven electric vehicles, we're going to have the capabilities to charge those vehicles locally and to be able to take some of the stress off the grid of bringing electricity from a far source down to us, because we'll be generating it locally, we'll be storing it locally, storing it sometimes in our vehicles, sometimes in stationary battery sources, but we're going to becoming much more decentralized, much more local, much more in control, to the point where we will be not only consumers, but we can become prosumers when we generate more energy than we need, or when we have it stored in our cars or our buses, as in White Plains is doing. White Plains as an example with school buses, where the school buses aren't being used during the summer, right? So they have 5 electric school buses, which are quiet, no fumes, nothing to upset the kids and cause asthma and deal with all those respiratory issues. Those electric buses during the summer, though, when they're sitting there, they're stationary battery sources. They're charging those buses at night when electricity is cheap and is very available, and then they're discharging it during the day into the grid. They're earning revenue off of that discharge, and that type of interaction between individuals, consumers, and the ability to become prosumers and control our own energy, reduce our own costs, support society and the grid is all these technology evolutions that are happening. So, yep, there's challenges, no doubt. Yes, indeed, we have to look at these sources and what we're going to do with them. But, if those of you who saw Ford versus Ferrari, that movie not too long ago, right, where Ford stepped up and wiped out Ferrari after a while, American innovation is amazing. And for those of you who want to see American innovation in action, I have some issues with Tesla for a bunch of different reasons, but there's a great couple of videos of Tesla versus Lamborghini, where the Tesla SUV blows away the top end, fastest Lamborghini on the planet. Take a look sometime. You'll be really interested.
Okay. As a follow-up to that, though, so we're going electrified. That means we need batteries. Batteries need elements that come out of the earth. The mining for that can be very dirty. But my question at the end is, you can recharge the battery only a certain number of times, and then the battery can't take the charge anymore. What happens to all of those batteries? If everything is going electric, we're going to need millions and billions of batteries. Is there a plan in place yet for dealing with batteries that are still have chemicals in them that are dirty, basically? Does this become another landfill issue, or is this like nuclear? What do we do with nuclear waste? Nuclear is a great idea, but how do we contain the nuclear waste?
Yeah, really, really great point. So a few different things. One is that when an electric vehicle's battery is no longer capable of moving our vehicles at the speeds that we want, right? That kind of performance per mile. The batteries, by the way, are across the board guaranteed for 8 miles, 100,000. 8 years, 100,000 miles. So first, there's a significant time period before you reach that point. But when you do reach that point, those batteries are still fine for stationary storage purposes. So the first wave is to take those batteries, reuse them from vehicles, use them for stationary storage. The next wave is, you're absolutely right, is there's no perfect solution here, right? And mining is definitely always disruptive to the planet and to everything around it. So one of the things that's happening is these very expensive substances that are in these batteries are worth a lot of money. So the next wave of things that we'll see as the industry continues to scale is recycling and taking those very expensive components and reusing them in different applications as well. So it's an evolving industry. It's not there. It's not perfect. Absolutely. Everything has its challenges. But you could see the light at the end of the tunnel with where this is going in a closed loop kind of thing, where you take a battery, you reuse it first, you take it apart, you use different pieces, and then you complete the cycle again.
Okay. I want to jump back to Boz now. I've got a 2-part question for you, Boz. Can you suggest some plans such as Platts posting and actual tools an owner of commercial buildings can use to negotiate transparent pricing, number one? And then the second part of that is, when is the best time to lock in oil and gas and electric pricing if you're looking to lock in?
Sure. There are many different public postings of fuel and natural gas, and it all depends on the company you're using, how they set up their pricing, what you feel comfortable with. It's all a negotiation. I've been doing this a long time. Some customers feel comfortable using a Platts posting. Other customers feel comfortable using a Journal of Commerce posting. There are some customers that, prefer to have a rack formula price. And, all of these postings, they don't always flow in unison. So it's more just the comfortability of what the customer wants and what the company you're dealing with can offer. Again, it's like you said, the more transparency, the more comfortability there is between the customer and the company. Because again, right, when prices skyrocket and you get your heating bill, you get your oil bill, immediately you're calling your oil company and saying, oh, well, what's going on? What are you doing to me? What are you doing to me? And, you know, the transparency relieves some of that stress. Like I mentioned earlier, there are so many things that are completely out of our control that do affect us every day. But that transparency, like you brought up, is what makes people comfortable. And it all depends on the company you're dealing with. As far as locking in, the time to lock in, that again, there are so many aspects that are out of our control. So let's take this year versus last year or 2 years ago. If you locked in your price this year anywhere around November, December, you made out incredible this year, because those prices back then were in the between $2 and $2.50 a gallon range. The weather didn't kick in until January, which is when the prices started to go up. And then the market really took off when the war in Ukraine happened. So customers who locked in this year did tremendous, did excellent with their lock-in. But if you go back to 2020, when COVID hit, the prices that winter were higher than they were towards the end of the winter and early spring because of COVID. Again, it's all timing, which is why I brought up the fact of maybe not doing a full lock-in, right? Don't lock in 100% of your usage, but maybe lock in half of your usage or 3/4 of your usage on the oil side, because that way you could hedge yourself a little bit. You could kind of balance your costs. Again, the worst feeling is the feeling everyone had got over this last month, where the prices skyrocketed completely out of your control. The weather's still cold, so you're stuck with this bill that you really have no recourse. There's nothing you could really do about it. You use the fuel, the market is not in our control. So that's what people are trying to avoid and eliminate, that sticker shock, as you mentioned earlier. And on the natural gas and the electricity side, sure, you could do a lock-in. You could always look at historical trends in the market and try to find that sweet spot. But, companies, what I do for some customers is you lock in for a shorter period of time and you maybe hedge. You don't lock in as much, or you use a posting. You lock in some of the transportation and float, the commodity side, or you lock in the commodity and float the transportation. So there's things that you can do to juggle. It's just all what your personal preferences are and personal needs.
Sure. I guess this one goes out. One final question here. We're running out of time. How does using this clean energy affect power outages? Do they affect these homes the same way as currently when we lose our gas or electric with the power that we're currently using right now? Is there a need for a generator if you're moving to solar or clean energy, Ron?
Great question. So if you don't have any battery storage system built in and you're not using your electric vehicle as a generator, then you still have electricity being fed into the grid, and it's coming through the wires and getting to your particular house. If you have solar on your house, it's synced to the grid under a standard system without a battery. And so when the grid goes down, you go down and you have a challenge. If you have battery storage now, and those prices have come down 18% a year and keep declining, or if you have a Ford F-150 or a Nissan Leaf today, you can power your house for 3 days just off of the energy storage in your vehicle battery. So what you want to do is have solar and/or have an electric vehicle and have that electric vehicle wired so that you can use it as a generator source. And then when the grid goes down, you have an emergency backup. Otherwise, yep, you need a backup generator, which is where I started 10 years ago when my wife had health issues, and I have it still today. My propane powered generator is my backup for now with an automatic transfer switch, but I'll soon be making that transition to my electric vehicles and my battery storage. And sorry, Boz, but I'm moving on. So
that's okay. Just to piggyback on that a little bit, the last thing I mentioned in my presentation was a demand response program. And this is something that, you know, the utilities, Con Ed, they're extremely concerned as electricity use increases. There is that extra stress on the electric grid. So for large facilities, large buildings, large factories, large facilities, users of electricity, if you get involved in that demand response program and you have the ability to manage and curtail your usage at different times throughout the day, week, month, year, the utility Con Ed will pay you. They will pay you to do that because it helps them eliminate brownouts and blackouts.
I get a check from my Nest thermostat every year, just about, by allowing that. So I'd like to thank everyone. Mackenzie, thank you for being our co-host, vice chair here today. I'd like to thank Ron and Boz Riley from Marathon Energy, if anybody needs to get in touch with him, and Ron Kamen from Earthkind Energy, if anybody needs to get in touch with him. If anybody needs their contact information, feel free to reach out to Kathleen Stack at HGAR.
thanks so much, John.
Thank you, John and Mackenzie and Kathleen and everyone for attending. Thank you all.
Thanks,
It's a
folks.
pleasure.